So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from the coffee session. My name is Matthew Durdy. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in a second. I'm the Chief Executive of the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult. Welcome to this session, which is Investment Trends in Europe's Cell and Gene Therapy Sector. First of all, thank you to ARM for the platform. I cannot see anybody out there. The lights are straight in my eyes, so if I'm looking a bit oddly, it's just because it's just all blank to me out there. But I can see it's filling up, which is great. Thank you to ARM for putting this on and for inviting us to come and talk today. We've got a great panel set up for you here, covering the diverse aspects of investment in the sector. And I'm sure, having had a pre-call with them a week or so ago, there's going to be a ton of very interesting and very useful information coming out of it. My job is simply to try and control the traffic. All the information and all the knowledge will be in the seats just here. I am, in fact, an investment banker by background prior to that, so I may be able to interpret it and comment on the odd thing that happens along the way. And one of the things that strikes you as when you first start your investment banking career is things are cyclical. And that's what they keep telling you. If you don't like the current situation, wait for a while, because it'll change. And I've been doing a talk like this for probably about 7 years now. I've been in the cell and gene therapy industry for 15 years. And when we first kicked off, the conversations we had with investors was, cell and gene, what? And then it was, it's interesting, but it's never going to make products. And then it was, well, it kind of works, but nobody's ever going to buy it. And then it quickly moved to, okay, how do we get some of this? We all want some, and the cycle goes on. And then it moved on to, okay, how much money do you want? And then it moved to, you're only going to get money if you can tell me about your manufacturing program, because everybody's trying to make this stuff now and there's no manufacturing capacity. So the question is, where are we now? What is the current situation? What's motivating it, and what's the direction it's going to go into? And hopefully we're going to try and answer some of those questions through the course of today, or through the course of this next 55 minutes or so. There are two parts to the question, as far as I can see it. The first part is what's going on in finance in general. And then the second part, which we're going to merge together, which is, why is Europe different from North America? We saw the data this morning. And the amount of investment last year, according to the ARM figures, was a fifth of what it is in the United States in Europe. Yet the activity, the populations are roughly analogous. The turnovers of the two regions are roughly analogous. Why is it so much weaker in Europe? Right, that's enough from me. I'm now going to introduce you to this fantastic group of panelists who are going to come onto the stage one by one as I introduce them and take their appointed seats. And the first of all is Dmitry Kuzmin, who's the Managing Director of 4Bio Capital. If you give him a quick round of applause as he comes up, that would be great. The next is Alberto Santagostino, who's the Senior Vice President and Head of Cell and Gene Therapy Technologies at Lonza. And then we've got Isabelle Scarabin, Director, Business Development and Licensing Officer at Bayer. And Alan Selby, Managing Director for Torreya. So within that mix, we've got a private investor, we've got an expert in the public markets, we've got an institutional investor, and we have a supplier with a perspective on the development of the industry. So I think we should get a good group of perspectives. Now, I'm not going to do introductions straight away. We're going to go give each person an opportunity to give introductions as we go along. So I'm going to go straight into the first question, which is really picking up from what I just said a minute ago, which is what's going on? Where are we? What's happening? How do we interpret the place that we're in today in terms of the investment market? And I'm going to address this to Dmitry to start with. Things have changed a bit since the last time we had a panel here. And last time I was involved with a panel like this, it really was the stage of, we'll give you as much money as you want as long as you can tell us what your manufacturing strategy is. But now things have changed. Investors have moved out. It creates concern and opportunities. So Dmitry, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about 4Bio. and tell us what you think is going on.
Certainly. So very good to see everyone back in person. Thank you to ARM for providing us with a platform to discuss the state of the times. So Pharma is a private and public equities investor based in London. We invest in advanced therapies only across 5 technological platforms: gene therapy and gene editing, cell therapy, RNA target therapies, and microbiome. We manage about $200 million, and we are focused primarily on building and investing into early stage companies in Northwestern and Central Europe. So in terms of what's happening in the marketplace, we're in Barcelona in April. It's quite cold outside, right? So it's quite cold outside in general right now. The market definitely froze. We saw last year over 100 transactions in the first quarter in the private markets, below 30 meaningful transactions in Q1 this year, right? There are definitely scales of magnitude lower involvement from institutional investors. And there are several reasons to this, so I think we can dissect them one by one. One is, weirdly enough, maturation of the sector. The point about the manufacturing strategy is extremely well made. Many companies in this space have been selling dreams for years. And these are dreams of cures, so they were excellent dreams. But we were in a space of backing platform companies, all of us, and building platform companies. And so the key questions were around manufacturing, release assays, and things like those. How can we prove the platform works, does what's intended? Now, the sector came to a point where many of these platforms have been embodied in real, advanced, clinical stage therapeutic assets. And people have started asking questions, looking at Bluebird, looking at Orchard, looking at Spark, looking at many other programs and their traction and commercialization. They started asking, well, how do we make money on this? How do you make this reimbursed? How do you prove you're best in class? How do you unlock a new therapeutic area? And so in a way, it's much easier to sell dreams than it is to sell robust clinical data, because your robust clinical data brings way more questions. So that's kind of the first reason. The second reason is obviously the great deflation in the public markets, right? The biotech got crushed throughout 21 and is not showing any signs of recovery. The privates typically follow the publics with a delay of 6 to 9 months. This is often thought of. The component that's not very often thought of is that also VC fundraising follows that with a 6 to 9 month delay, as the denominator effect of public slow and privates not mark to market gets passed on to limited partners. And so it is progressively becoming harder and harder to raise new venture funds. So the availability of capital is decreasing in this sector as compared to 2020 and early 2021. Now, in the United States, the availability of capital has been extraordinarily high. And so the delta between what happened in Boston in Q4 2020 and what's happening now is incredible. We're seeing a contraction in uplift expectations, markup expectations from round to round, that's drastic. Now, seed to an A, a successful startup would count on a 5x step up a year and a half ago. Now 2x is really cool. And people are saying, well, 1.4, 1.7 is probably the market. Series B, you could count on a 3x, or if you had a major partnership. Now, I know people who raised a flat and were very happy with it, and 1.3 is considered a pretty solid A to B step up. So in terms of gauging where we are, we're probably in 2017. That's kind of where we saw these kind of numbers. And then Europe is in a very special situation because we never had quite the largesse than the US market had. And so if Boston is starting from here and dropping into here, it feels like the end of the world, but where they're landing is still above ground. Whereas Europe is falling from here, but due to the delta is kind of reaching subterranean regions right now. And so the availability of capital in Europe will be very low going forward. And To add to that, there was a trend for market integration in European venture and biotech. 3 major European firms have been acquired over the past year. So EQT acquired Life Sciences Partners, Eurasia acquired Pharma, and now most recently, last week, Carlyle acquired Abingworth in the UK. So this shows increased integration interest of large PE houses in European biotech venture, that's a positive, but also shows that the number of firms that are out there is extraordinarily low as compared to the US, and the ecosystem really hinges on very few people. And so we're way more vulnerable and less resilient than the US ecosystem at this junction. So where we go from here, to summarize all of that, the next 1.5 to 2 years will be very conservative for European venture investors. It will be harder to raise dry powder. It will be harder to find syndication for later stage deals with US investors. So we'll all be conservatives, valuations will be lower, and there will be way more attention to detail in terms of assessing the clinical data and how do we get to reimbursed products.
Thank you. Interesting. So, I mean, if I do a very crude summary of that from my perspective, it's a sort of two dynamics, but primarily a dynamic of a period of correction after perhaps over-enthusiasm. Critical to answer that is, is this a collapse or is it just an adjustment in terms of value? And does everybody see that same? So, Isabelle, is that the world that you're working in, or is it a different one that you're in?
Yeah, so I would say let's keep hope in this field because we do believe there is a huge potential in cell and gene therapies. Obviously because they address the root cause of the diseases and because, they are aiming at leading towards preventing, treating, and potentially reversing diseases. So we don't see a decline of the sector. It's not a sign of the decline. So keep hope. And the reason why we are thinking that is because we believe that 2 main drivers remain. First, it's the high patient need, and second, it's the innovation in the science. So as long as the innovation will leverage, the science to provide new therapies for patients where there are no or limited treatment options. So we believe that cell and gene therapies will provide high value in the future. So let's keep on track and let's keep the dialogue between all of us, I would say.
Which is a really important underlying message. It'd be easy to take it away that there's some sort of bubble going on. The difference being there is fundamental value underneath here. And does anybody else? Alberto.
Maybe I also want to jump in here to put a small comment. I wanted to make a case similar to yours, but I have to say that I want now to pause and not picture such of a doom and gloom because it could be a bit dramatic. And on the other side, I'm a little bit more aligned with you, Isabelle. Like the situation is much more tight. It's difficult to find funding, but I still believe, and I've seen cases, that good science find money. So I think the overexcitement is over. Because before, as you were saying, Dima, you were selling dreams, we were selling dreams, we were buying dreams. Now it becomes science. So I think for any company that has good science and a reasonable expectation, funding will be available. But speculative actions or getting financials without having done the proper homework will become increasingly complicated, at least for the foreseeable future. Until we see probably another big product of Bayer breaking the market and having an enormous success, that will really excite us all.
Yeah.
But
we hope to.
I have to say, return to fundamentals sounds quite an appealing thing to me in terms of what's going on. Alan, did you ever want to say anything about this? Or?
I think there's quite clearly a big split in what's going on in the US and Europe. I don't think it's as black and white, maybe as Dmitry said, in terms of the window being shut. I think there are funds that have raised money, and if they're going to put money anywhere over the next period of months, it's more likely to be in cell and gene therapy than pretty much anything else. With the provisos that Dmitry said that it's, they're going to limit it to the best companies. I think raises are going to be smaller, for example. And I think the aspiration of what companies can do with, what biotechs can do with that money is going to be more modest. But that's been the problem in Europe as long as anyone can remember. And I think also importantly, the number of companies that have raised money in the last period of time, and it's not just been small amounts of money, it's been quite sizable amounts. That money's not necessarily just, gone up in smoke. There's still plenty of money in the system generally, and I'm a firm believer that while things are not looking as rosy from a funding perspective now as they were 6-8 months ago, there's still a hell of a lot of money in the system. Good science will find the money. And, if I had 2 friends looking for money, one being a cell and gene therapy company and another one being a small molecule, I'd put my money on the cell and gene therapy guy to raise money than the small molecule guy right now.
Good, thank you. I should have said at the beginning, the team here are absolutely on for questions and challenge. So if anybody wants to ask a question at any point, do something to make yourself seen, because I cannot see you from where I'm standing. But please stick your hand up, look for one of the crew. There are some microphones wandering around anytime. And if we don't get to you, come up on stage and harass me, and I'll make sure we ask the question. Brilliant. Good start. So we've got a little bit of a picture of what's going on. Changing themes a little bit, because we wanted to try and, in the period we've got, try and cover different bases of the subject of investment. And for so many of us, or for all of us actually, for everybody in this room, in some way, shape, or form, the future of this industry relies upon a pipeline of new companies emerging, a pipeline of new technologies emerging from the research sector to a large extent, and to some extent out of the corporates as well. And for us to understand the future of the next few years of investment in the space and growth in the space and new companies, we need to understand what's going on with the pipeline. So Alan, back to you again.
Yeah.
What's your sense, because in some ways there should be no necessary correlation between the availability of good science and necessarily the funding that's available today. Where are we with respect to the pipeline?
Shall I introduce myself a little
Yeah, please do.
first as well? Sorry. So I'm Alan Selby. I'm Managing Director in Torreya, based in our London office. We're a life sciences focused boutique investment bank. We've been around 15 years, done around 300 deals in that time. And the reason I'm on this stage is because we've worked with companies that are in the cell and gene therapy space on what I would say both sides of the aisle. One side being the biotech companies, and we've helped them either raise money or do large licensing deals, large M&A deals. And then on the other side, we've helped companies like Cobra Biologics, Roslin, Syrian, help find new owners, new investors. And so we've got quite a lot of really good insight on that hopefully we can bring to bear in this discussion as to what's going on in the market. The analogy I like to make is, what we're in within cell and gene therapy is, we're looking for gold, very much the dreams analogy. And on one side you've got the people looking for gold, and on the other side you've got the picks and shovels guys. And at the moment, everyone's having a field day, and clearly, there's now a question mark as to what's going on. And clearly, there's still a lot of gold in the mountains and the mines to be looked for. How easy is it for the biotech guys to find the gold? It's going to be harder to raise the money to go and do the digging, but for the guys doing the picks and shovel production, very clearly there's still a lot of money to go and buy the stuff that they're producing. And I think specifically to the question of what's going on in the pipeline, I think looking back in what's happened over a relatively short space of time from 2018 to 2021, I've basically tried to piece together a few stats that I think show an unsurprising level of growth. Looking at, for example, the number of just developers of product in the field has gone up almost 50% from 900 in 2018 to over 1,300 at the end of last year. The amount of money that's gone into the system in just traditional fundraisings, whether it's IPOs all the way through privates. 2018 was 13 billion. Last year, 2021, was over 23 billion. If you look at the number of clinical trials that were being run, it's over doubled. It's gone from 1,000 in 2018 to 2,400 last year. And I'm therefore quite enthusiastic about looking forward, particularly with the money that's gone into the system in the last period of time. If there's companies out there that can't find their own cash to remain independent companies at an early stage, there's more than enough big biotechs that have raised lots of money that have to do something with that cash. And so the good science will find a home, and that pipeline will continue coming through. And I think also importantly that helps give the longevity to the pipeline. I did a little bit of homework looking at how many deals, how many of the top deals in the last few years have been around cell and gene therapy assets. And if you just look at the top 10 over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, it's roughly half to 2/3 that are from the cell and gene therapy world. That's not by value, that's just by deal count. So of the last, if you look at last year, year before, the top 10 deals, something between 5 and 7 each year are based on cell and gene therapy. And so that suggestion of what should keep happening in terms of fueling the fire of the pipeline, I think is absolutely really encouraging for everyone in this room and in the sector more generally.
Brilliant, thank you. So, good message. The fundamentals are good, we hope. Dmitry, do you agree?
Certainly, fundamentals are very good. And I think going back to Alan's thesis about good science finding a home, definitely this is leading to change in models. I had a fascinating dinner with a big pharma head of therapeutic area in January, asking them, well, look, everything's cheap, why are you not buying? And like, no one's selling.
Yeah.
Like, we're trying to buy, where we have a checkbook that's stopped me functioning, but the boards of biotechs are still very high up in the sky with the diamonds there. And this just takes this creeping realization that we're now inhabiting a different world, and we have to agree to different upsides. We have to agree to different deal structures that really requires a step change from the mentality of the boards, of the VC directors, and so on and so forth. But I think, crucially, Alan touched on a very important point. Biotech to biotech partnering has rarely been productive in the previous cycle, right? And in many cases frowned upon, right? I mean, if you're a partner with a small company, then this means you couldn't excite a larger partner. However, I think in this space where private biotechs could be considered mid-caps because they have 300, 400, 500 on their balance sheet, and they need to do things, and they also have very large teams capable of high-quality execution, this can be extremely fruitful. For example, we have a portfolio company based in France called Sparing Vision, where we co-led Series A in 2020, and Sparing Vision since acquired a company called Gamma Therapeutics, which is highly synergistic, bringing together two very strong teams to excellent strategies, and really, I think, leapfrogging a lot of the competition based on that. So this can be a very executed right, biotech to biotech partnering in the slow market is a very smart tool to use. I very much agree.
Interesting. So I mean, it goes back to the analogy, the point I made earlier on about there's almost nothing new in terms of cycles. That's a conventional phase of the cycle when the capital starts to drop out, a few companies left with a bit of extra cash, you get a consolidation phase.
Yep.
They close their eyes to the valuations because they're just doing it on paper, and we can move forwards. Interesting. Anybody else want to comment in terms of the pipeline? Particularly interested in what, the emergence of new companies and the likes in terms of. So a little bit about the cell and gene therapy Catapult. We are an organization with a vision to develop or to see a thriving industry that's delivering cell and gene therapies to the world. And for that we need to see huge amounts of new technologies coming through, as well as all the developments in terms of cost and uptake and everything else that is there. And I'm just interested to get a sense from people that they really do feel that the new technologies are coming through. Are you, when we first emerged, and so the way that we operate as the Catapult is that we look for barriers to the development of the industry, and we move into those to try and change the barriers. And one of the early things was, as I talked about it before, this sort of, cell and gene therapy, what's that? Money wouldn't go anywhere near it because it wasn't well enough defined, there wasn't enough structure there. We went through a period of 5 to 7 years of being completely displaced, and we moved out of that space because actually conventional money, if you like, was going straight into it. Are you seeing that still today? Are people still going into the universities to pull out assets?
Yeah, definitely. We see a huge amount of new technologies, and if you take, for instance, today, we saw many interesting technologies which could be applied across many different therapeutic areas. So there's a lot to do, at least for us, to look at. And so it's going to take us like a lot of attention and time to evaluate all of those technologies, but for sure innovation is still alive. And so it's very at the same time interesting but also challenging, because we are not going to be able to do everything. So I would say that we have a lot of work to do to evaluate those technologies, but for sure there is a huge potential here to bring forward the delivery of such cell and gene therapies. So very interesting, yeah.
Good. Okay, I'm going to move on. If there's no other points, Alberto, you didn't have anything. No. Okay, good. So we've just painted a picture where there's fundamentals are good. There's some disruption, shall we say, to the flow of money principally around historical valuations, and yet there's still an emerging pipeline. There's still things coming through that need funding. That requires some degree of innovation in terms of how we match together the essential lifeblood of these companies, and a number of novel innovation approaches have emerged. I talked a second ago about the way we were put together to approach, or one of our activities was to approach the bringing out of technologies out of universities. But Isabelle, I think in terms of the later stage innovation in particular, Bayer has had some different approaches in terms of supporting companies. Do you want to tell us a bit more about your role in Bayer, and then also what you've been doing with some of the companies and the acquisitions you've been doing?
Sure, thank you. So I'm working at Bayer. I'm a licensing business officer within the BD&L and Open Innovation group, focusing more on new platforms, cell and gene therapies, and in some therapeutic areas such as ophthalmology. Before joining recently Bayer, in fact, I was working at GeneSight Biologics during 8 years as a BD&L director, and it's true that during 8 years I was also able to look into the long journey to develop a gene therapy for rare diseases where there is a high unmet medical need. And so it's for me very interesting to switch from one side to the other side and see how we can all participate to move forward those type of therapies. So coming back to the question, so indeed I would say that one of the reasons why I decided to join Bayer is that indeed the company is implementing an innovative model of investments for innovation. So let me explain how it consists. So over the past 3 years, Bayer has invested more than 2.5 billion euros to build up a cell and gene therapy platform. And first through acquisitions of Blue Rock Therapeutics and AskBio, but not only, also through strategic collaborations with partners such as Mammoth Biosciences in gene editing that the company announced earlier this year. And so if we focus on AskBio and Blue Rock, for instance, Both companies are true pioneers in their respective field, and we do share the same vision to leverage new technologies, to develop new therapies for patients, where again there is a high unmet need. And with those acquisitions, the objective of Bayer is to create new platforms that will fuel our pipeline sustainably and in the long term. And to do so, those two companies are operating through an arm's length model. And so what does that mean, in fact? So AskBio and BlueRock, they continue to work autonomously because we believe that this model will preserve and nurture their existing entrepreneurial spirit and culture of innovation. We do work closely with them. We help to support their pipeline. We offer additional expertise should they need it. And in the meantime, Bayer is steering the overall cell and gene therapy strategy. Bayer is ensuring that the different platforms complement each other, and that the platforms, is combining the best we can find in the biotech and pharma know-how. And it works actually because, our collaborations provided already some opportunities with value enabling activities, for instance, and for partnering opportunities, we are working together to further invest in the futures. And as an example, during this conference, there are some colleagues from BlueRock and AskBio, and we are, holding some meetings together. So, in conclusion, I would say that this type of model, for us, the principal objective is to retaining the speed, the agility, and the innovation of those biotechs. While Bayer, as a big corporation, will have many advantages when it will come to later development stage, right? So this is how we see the collaboration.
We watched with great interest how that develops as well. Alberto, Lonza, do you find yourself finding novel ways of working with companies in the sector and supporting them?
Yes, absolutely. It is important to fit every company in every model and situation of the time. So the needs that get served toward a big company are different than the one that gets served in a smaller one. And in the context is that we can sort of pool a certain type of expertise, capacity, or capital that may be difficult to access in separate terms. I'm thinking, for instance, on process development that is becoming one of the key things to bring forward products that have a chance to go from phase 3 to actually commercialization, is where we can bring an expertise that other companies on their own feet may struggle to put together, as much as avoiding the risk of investing and deploying its own capital. So it's a little bit kind of tailoring the mechanism to what is the specific need of each of the companies. In a way, in general, it's around partnering and creating a more easy substrate to actually bring forward the intent of bringing therapies to the market. So that's the holistic view, but then I'm sure we are going to get more specific.
I think, observing trends again, go back 10 years, 8 years, 9 years, it was very much a case of there were no leaders, there were no real experts in the space. Everybody had to go off on their own and try and develop technologies, and lots of platforms were developed, which is expensive in terms of, we're talking about investment here, and if everybody is investing in an individual separate platform, that's expensive from a capital utilization point of view. And I think it's quite interesting seeing the two models that you both describe are ways of getting greater value from technology platforms, which in itself is both better use of capital, but also an opportunity for others in the space of finding other ways of getting investment by partnering with people and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if anybody wants to add anything on this.
Maybe I can take this one. What I'm observing is that back in the days, there was, when the capital was plentiful, there was a desire to invest in a plentiful way on different avenues, one of which was developing its own manufacturing site and premises, which is extremely capital intense, Dima, I suppose, kind of 50, more probably 100 millions in terms of capital deployed to get something that is reasonable in terms of GMP compliance. This is a very meaningful capital lockup. And what I'm observing in these latest few months is that many of those clinical stage companies, but not only, are selling their facilities for multiple reasons that it's harder to raise capital, and therefore they're trying to capitalize and cash out the investment they did before. But this gives two signals. One is that it's more difficult to raise capital, as we have been discussing up to now, but also that maybe investing in fixed assets that are so capital intensive may not be the perfect model for clinical stage companies. And therefore, what I think is happening is that the market is really shifting toward better quality spending. So what I would argue that in a case of constrained capital, like we've been discussing now, is not going to be about decreasing the quality of spending, but being more selective in how the money is spent, keeping high the quality. Let me give a few examples. Rather than trying to go global from the offset with very wide clinical trials, maybe pays off to be very deep, focused, and effective in selected clinical trials in narrower areas or in narrower geographies. It may make very little sense to invest in own capital facilities and deploying big infrastructure when there is accessible facilities. I would almost argue oversupply of capacity in the market that could be accessible as almost as a fee for service. As much as it would be a stupid choice to try to rush faster toward commercialization with a process that is unstable or a process that is really not GMP compliant, because eventually it will cost more at the very least, but also very likely it will not be commercializable. And we have seen recently many setbacks, also big names of companies that they didn't really develop their analytical aspect or their sterility aspect or their process technology in a way that would have been sufficient to take them all the way to the market. So I would encourage that in a context of constrained capital, that you don't decrease the quality of your spending, but that you make choices about where you are going to do things and where you are not going to do things. So keeping the quality, but decreasing the waste as a general philosophy. I don't know if I was addressing your question.
No, you were, and you may have wandered on to the next question, so the answer to the next one might be shorter, but before I do that, so the next question really focuses down on this idea of one particular area of investment that I think is particularly dynamic, certainly the panel thinks is particularly dynamic at the moment, which is around the area of manufacturing investment, which is, as we've acknowledged many, many times over the years, a very capital-intensive activity in our space. So before I do that, because it is a bit of a change of subject, I just wanted to see if there are any questions from the floor at all. No?
One down there.
Hi, sorry, do you just introduce yourself?
My name is Isabelle. I'm Associate Director of Business Development at Smart Labs. We are labs and service and also entering manufacturing as a service as well in the next year. And the one thing that you mentioned is how they're now selling their manufacturing facilities for the various reasons. But I'm also seeing companies that are spinning out of therapeutics companies to actually use their platform as a new service provider. And I'm kind of just wondering your opinion, is that something you think we'll see more of, or is it something that you think that these companies that are being spun out will actually be absorbed by like the Lonzas of the world?
So, brilliant, you just asked my question. Thank you very much. Perfect. So, no, that's it. That's my aim, is to get everybody else to do it. So if I'm going to reframe it slightly, but then we'll move on to it. So there is this dynamic going on within the manufacturing space, and it's going in multiple directions. And this is one I really would like to hear from the floor on, because I think it's an interesting moment. You go back 10 years, there was no expertise in the space. Gross comment, but generally speaking. Fast forward to now, there are now CDMOs with lots and lots of experience. There are all of these platforms that have been developed. There are some eye-watering transactions that have taken place over the course of the last 5 years, 3 years in particular, last couple of years. What's going on in that space and what direction is it going? So, Alberto, I'm going to come back to you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself as well, because you haven't had a chance to do that, and a little bit about your role at Lonza.
Very, very happy to do so. So, Alberto Santagostino, I'm the Senior Vice President of Cell and Gene Technologies of Lonza. Lonza is probably one of the most prominent CDMO in the cell and gene technology space. We had the chance to support more than 150 projects in different stages of their development, and we are currently active in more than 50 projects that we are bringing toward commercialization. We have taken a few products to market, and particularly proud of that. And what we are believing to be particularly good is really the full journey from pre-IND to really actually commercialization of the products, especially in cell and gene technologies. The business unit that I follow is one of the many within Lonza, which addresses multiple modalities, which include monoclonal antibodies and also small molecule. But coming back to probably your question, this is exactly what we are observing in the market. There is many companies that developed in their scope very interesting technology, sometimes products, sometimes process or service technology. And in the context of a market that is becoming more, I would say, honest or true, in which actually money invested should yield a return, money that has been invested and struggled to yield a return kind of pushes company to think about creative way about how to create value out of their asset. And so there are certain process technologies or technologies that are valuable and could be valuable across the board for many companies, and those are becoming available as much as I think this year I've seen more than 10 manufacturing sites or even more up for sales. And in our case, we, as Lonza, like to pick up the good technologies and trying to bring them to value at the broader market. One example, for instance, just recently is the investment we did in exosomes, where we acquired a manufacturing site and the technology to manufacturing exosomes through a perfusion, and also analytical center toward single particle analysis, which takes to a completely different leap in terms of QC development and QC methodologies, especially in the aspect of characterization of the product, which, by the way, is not the right panel, will be a big question of FDA's going forward, because the FDA likes to know what you're injecting into patients, to put it simple. And today, our characterization methods are pretty rough, and so they will need to become to a different level of sophistication as we go forward. So it's absolutely interesting. So it could be that a company is sitting on some inherent technology to their product, enabling their product that could be definitely interesting to the broader market and could enable more widely the platform. The only thing that I would like to stress, and then I will give it back to you, is that one thing that has been severely underestimated and is really hindering the value of many companies is the consideration around the CMC and technical development. If you would look at statistics, you would see that if you take phase 3 products that goes commercial in monoclonal antibodies, I would say 3/4, 4/5 managed the step, and when they fail for clinical reason. If you go in cell and gene technologies and you look at late stage products, there are, I don't call them phase 3 because we have pivotal, we have all type of things, but then when they try to make the step toward commercial, there is a kind of a 50-50, give it or take. The N is very low, so it's difficult to give it precise statistic, a 50-50, but of the 50 that fails, a good half is related to technical reason of manufacturing, CMC technical development, and only half related to clinical. So there is an aspect related to those technologies and those developments into the process and taking them to the right standards that becomes critically important for a company that is serious about taking a product to market. And then the difficult question will be, when shall I actually invest into process technology? And that is a little bit difficult. It costs, but if you do it too late, it can totally hinder the product and destroy the company. So going back to maybe the only real message I wanted to give is not about decreasing the quality of the spending, but is about decreasing the waste about where the money is spent, so on things that are not necessary.
Interesting. I'm going to try and make sure that we don't diverge onto a manufacturing development question, which quite happy to do a panel on another day. But Alan, you're in that space. You're doing transactions in that space. You're looking at the transactions that are going on. Tell us about some of the stuff that's going on, because there have been some novel things happening. And is this your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. Looking at it from a slightly different angle, I think ultimately what's driving a lot of investment, particularly from financial investors or newcomers into the cell and gene therapy market, is that really you still don't have a particularly consolidated large group of the big providers. And so what you've therefore got is quite a significant gap between, let's say the important factors for, let's say a number of you as potential customers of this market. There's a significant gap between the top and the bottom in terms of price, and also top and the bottom in terms of, let's say, the important features around customer requirements of things like timeline, agility, et cetera, and so for financial investors who like to come into spaces like cell and gene therapy manufacturing, they actually see that if you can get the right platform business that may be quite small, there's a lot of opportunity to win good business, grow their investment quite significantly, and the values that have been achieved on exit on some of these businesses that have raced ahead and really grown quite nice businesses that have ultimately been snapped up by bigger guys, the potential to make a lot of money quite quickly is significant. Fundamentally, I think the important thing is you've got to, as the investors know, that they have to pick the right platform that they get into to invest in the first place. They have to be comfortable with the know-how that is within that business that they're buying, to make sure that that's a platform that can develop its own pipeline and really grow the pipeline significantly. And also, they as investors or new entrants into the cell and gene therapy manufacturing space, from being, let's say, more small molecule or something else, they have to make sure that they've got the right people to support them within their organization to help these smaller companies go from being quite modest to being far more significant. And I think, with the events of the last few years and the maturity within the market, more generally, I think those characteristics are certainly there. The customers are definitely there. The money is there. And, interestingly, I think the CEOs of a number of biotech companies are no longer dreaming of building their own bricks and mortar facilities on site. I think they're seeing the benefit of picking out good quality providers in that sector that focus on the smaller end of the market to really help them grow. And I think that still bodes well for some of the smaller manufacturers that are out there in terms of what their valuation could achieve even now with the relative permafrost that's out there. But I think going forward, what investors who invest in new businesses right now in that smaller end of the manufacturing market, what they could be worth 2, 3, 4 years from now.
Interesting. Thank you. Dmitry, you were looking at me earlier on when we were talking about...
I think we're segued in a different
Sorry?
direction. So we're segued in a different direction, so it's fine.
But the time that you were looking at me it was when we were talking about the sort of relative merits of investment in platforms and...
Yeah, so I mean, I think one point to consider is there's not only manufacturing spin-outs, really. Because if you think about the companies that got built from 2015, when we all heard that cell and gene is never going to work, right? You couldn't build a virtual biotech in this space because there were zero service providers, right? And so every company that got built was an integrated company with wet labs, protein engineering, antibody engineering, RNA engineering, CRISPR capability, manufacturing, CMC, all of that. And so now as these companies mature, they have a squeeze, some of them have products on the market now, but they're not doing as much early stage development. We got faced with the questions like, what do we do with our protein, like Lyell spun out their protein engineering in a separate spin out, right? It's a therapeutic spin out, but it's completely separate. There are many manufacturing spin outs now, which are very smart. And I think there will be more of this, not only on the manufacturing side, but also on the platforming side, and the components of these startups they're not going to need anymore. And so this is the positive drive. The negative drive is the lack of capital. And so I think the ones who are going to win are the people who can attract with their business models the private equity money, not the venture money. Because the venture money is going to back therapeutic assets and diagnostics. This is the core business. Whereas the manufacturing spin-outs that can reliably acquire either strategic funding and partnering or PE money, this is what's going to be attractive medium term.
Interesting, interesting. Did you want to say anything on it?
No, yes, definitely. I mean, I think it is mandatory to invest in manufacturing. Because manufacturing is a fundamental factor for the success of cell and gene therapies, and to be able to, bring the cell and gene therapies, to the patients on a global scale. And for instance, acquiring AskBio and BlueRock provided us with world-class GMP facilities specialized both in AAV manufacturing and cell therapy manufacturing. And on top of that, Bayer is also investing still and again. I mean, we have our extensive in-house expertise, and more recently we just started to build a facility in Berkeley in California. So we announced that last year. So really, investment in manufacturing can be done in different ways, but it has to be done.
Interesting. So I'm going to change tack slightly from the plan, but it's a question that follows naturally, I think, from the discussion that we've been having, or certainly it's a question that's come to my mind through the discussion that we've been having, and that is, each time that I've been involved in a panel like this, we've tried to give back to the audience a sense of what it is you need to do in this environment to raise capital or get investment. And that's ranged from, it's all about the science, stupid, don't do anything else, just make sure the science comes up, which I've never believed in our space, to you've got to get the healthcare economics sorted out and the whole target product profile. Remember that was introduced happily into the industry. Now it rolls off everybody's tongue. And then a couple of years ago, it was you've got to have a manufacturing story. What does an organization that's trying to raise money today have to have in order to make that capital? I'm going to go down the line.
It depends on the stage. So I think if we separate two pools, early stage like seed, Series A, and the execution stage, right? So creation, seed, and Series A, 0 to 1 venture, right? So you take something that doesn't work and you show that you have a credible path to making it work. So the key question there is your 0 to 1, right? How do you make it work? So it's not only just the science stupid, but also the capability to execute on that science. But the critical bit is your preclinical capability, the validity of your models, the robustness of your data. This is really key, will always be key in the early stage venture. To ask for more is unfair because these people do not have the capability, they're academics, they're not typically built to do that, right? So in terms of the execution mode venture, so mature Series A onwards, where you have a real organization. So 3 key things to us in particular. 1, team. Execution, any execution mode venture is only as strong as the team executing on that venture. If you cannot hire and retain and also show that the people you have around the table are the best people possible to be doing this particular job, you will fail. So this is number 1. Number 2, your clinical strategy. Here kind of is the time for me to get out my professor of experimental medicine hat and say, endpoints have been a complete and utter failure for our industry in the past 2 years. There are several trials that have been designed to fail. There are several groups that failed absolutely abysmally at the late stage because they went for a quick win rather than a real long-term endpoint and a slowly progressive disease, which was the only right and ethical choice to make. And so thinking about your clinical strategy, making sure that it's robust, ethical, and does right by the patient, and also is built to give you a real, true long-term answer is paramount. And then the third, manufacturing. And unless you can demonstrate to the FDA what you're putting in a patient, you're not going to let you go anywhere.
But not necessarily home-built manufacturing. You have to access. Anything to add to that, Alberto?
I'm very much in agreement to the points that has been said. Tactically, it was very much from investor side. Tactically, if I would be a company, I would also be considered to have a certain cash runway that gives me space of maneuvering and not being strangled against the wall if the kind of cash deadline becomes too close. And therefore, there would be a nice planning around that. And then the other consideration that I would do is probably around simplicity. I often see in the presentation in these days very thick pipeline, different modalities. I wonder how a team of 50, 60, 150 people can manage portfolio that are so wide and dispersed, I would say. Then just a comment on the manufacturing. Depend on what is the ambition. If it is IND phase 1, quickly sell the company is one thing. If the ambition is to make it commercial, manufacturing is not a per se a commodity. It needs to be qualified in the sense there is quality manufacturing and there is less quality manufacturing. There is manufacturing that can take you probably to phase 1, other type that can take you to phase 1, 2, and then there is only certain type of manufacturing that can take to commercial. And there is an increasingly high bar from FDA around the specification and the requirement around the latter part, but also start to see requirements increasing for the previous part. So manufacturing needs to be qualified by the quality of the very same versus the phase ambition that the company has.
We're burning through time, so I'm going to keep rushing. Isabelle, you presumably got a slightly different perspective because you...
So maybe as a final word, because time is running, I would say that investing has to be more than just capital, and for us, what we want to do is to bring on the table more than that, and we want to bring on the table our capabilities, to the partner, so that we can get the best combination, and that those capabilities will aim towards clinical success, right? Good manufactured product, okay, and reimbursed products when it will be marketed. And so investing will have to be more than money, but a real, I would say, partnership between different parties to get success, of course.
Thank you. Alan.
Good. Look, I would boil it down to effectively 2-3 very simple questions. One is, what's the commercial relevance, and is there a genuine commercial need for what you're developing? The second thing is there a deliverable, conceivable, sensible plan to be able to get to that point? And that includes lots of the things that people have discussed. If you've got those two questions answered very well, you should be able to raise money.
Brilliant. Thank you. I will sum up very briefly, and then I'm going to ask you to thank the panelists. I'm quite relieved that actually the story turned out to be a positive one. There's been some corrections going on, but it's not a dot-com bust. There's fundamentally underlying value. It's still there. It's actually a sign of the maturity of the last 10 years of all of our efforts, that we're now in a stage where the dynamics of the infrastructure of the supply chain, particularly in the industry, call for a different kind of investment in a different way. And largely that's a global phenomenon rather than an EU phenomenon, and the differences are hard to see. There's still money in the system. People have made some good realizations that money will keep circling around. It's not going out to other sectors in preference. And so, the good times are still ahead of us, as long as we're listening and looking at not trying to do what we were doing last year, but looking forward to what we're going to do next year. So with that, I would like to thank the fantastic panel in the usual way.